So I was in the mood for a good true crime book, and kind of just picked one out at random at the library. It was called The Serial Killer Whisperer by Pete Earley, and it sounded intriguing because it was about a kid who suffers a traumatic brain injury, and then he starts corresponding with serial killers in prison, because who wouldn't want to have Jeffrey Dahmer as your pen pal, I guess, right? I read the foreword. He's going to the post office to go pick up his latest batch of letters from serial killers with his girlfriend. They go home, and then with his parents, they sit around the kitchen table, and the father reads the letter from the serial killer out loud. By the end of the foreword, there's some information in that letter that prompts them to say something to the effect of, we really should let the police take a look at this. So that was the foreword to the book. So you're under the impression that, okay, the book was going to be about how his corresponding with the serial killers, on top of the fact that he has this traumatic brain injury, which affected different lobes in his brain. You would assume that, okay, maybe because he has damage to a certain lobe, it allows him to maybe think like a serial killer, right? After all, the book is called The Serial Killer Whisperer. I just assumed that the entire book was going to be about how he was using his newfound hobby of writing serial killers and getting them to divulge their innermost fantasies and secrets and all that stuff, that all that information was going to be used to solve cold cases. And the book was going to be really cool. Like, oh, wow, look, they figured out where, this poor victim, where her body is, and they were able to finally give the family closure after so many decades later, right? So I got in like 2/3 of the way into the book. I got to chapter 26, and that none of that stuff was going on. What was going on was a very interesting story about how Tony Ciaglia, who is the boy who suffered the traumatic brain injury as a result of a friend pulling a high-powered jet ski turn right in front of him on a lake when he was a child, and overcompensating where he should make his turn in order to splash him with water, and then wound up hitting him in his skull with the jet ski. Tony Ciaglia's story is very good, and it could have been its own book where you could delve into his hobby of writing the serial killers, because it is a very major part of his recovery. However, the book lost me because it would pull me in with his healing process and then his falling backwards because, like, say, he goes off of his medications and has violent relapses and that are looking to derail him from being a member of society that can function amongst everyone else. And then it goes over to, here's the letters from these different serial killers almost in their entirety. They go on, some of them go on for a couple of pages. And they're very graphic. Now, that part in itself is also very interesting because they're these very graphic letters written by serial killers. Some of them are very famous. Okay, the Genesee River Killer, Arthur Shawcross, he's featured a lot on chapters that I read. Joe Roy Metheny, David Gore, Robert C. Hansen, guy up in Alaska who was kidnapping and hunting prostitutes in the wilderness for sport. So he's having these letters. These letters are featured in the book, and they're very graphic. Now, the part that is interesting about the letters is, we never see the innermost thoughts of a serial killer for the most part. From time to time, you get these interviews or whatever. But this seems to be a little bit more uncensored, if you will, because Tony let him know, like, hey, I'm not gonna sell any of your autographs. I'm not gonna sell any of your memorabilia. I'm not making money off of this. I just want to write you in hopes that we could just be pen pals. He really that's all he wanted. Okay, so these letters are very insightful into the mind of a serial killer. So in that respect, the book is good for that. However, when you take the letters and you combine them with a really awesome story about Tony's accident and then his struggle to recover, and he did an amazing recovery. By the way, this guy really did great for somebody who died 3 times, okay, and was in a coma. He came out of it, and he found himself, first of all, he had a great family to support him that loves him to death, and he loves them. And he also wound up meeting a very beautiful young woman who he wound up marrying, I believe, who was also very loving and very caring. And they formed this great unit. It's like a team, like Team Tony almost, right? That story on its own was great. But it didn't, every time it got to the letters to the serial killers, it just kind of like, it was like you put down the one book and now you're picking up another book and reading that. So it didn't really gel together. It would have been better as 2 books, in my opinion. The Serial Killer Whisperer, it was interesting. I could not get all the way through it. I gave up on chapter 26. I just said, I'm done. There's no cold cases being solved in this book at all. And that was what I wanted, and I incorrectly assumed was going to be the meat and potatoes of this book was, look at all these cold cases he's able to help the police solve now because they're telling him where all the bodies are, for example. Or he's able to have this dialogue with them that an ordinary police investigator cannot, right? And I assumed that because of the special bond that he formed with them, hey, why don't you tell me what happened to victim X, victim Y, and victim Z? Because the police have always wondered. And then he can, I'll tell you, Tony, this is what happened to him. And then, he lets the police know. None of that happened. Now, I read some book reviews online. I heard some similar complaints is that there were no cold cases verified by the readers. There were no cold cases that eventually got solved. There was information that may have been passed to the police, but it didn't seem like any action was taken upon that information. Since this book was not going to actually deal with the solving of cold cases, in other words, Pete Earley, the author, he already knew this before he wrote the book. Before he took pen to paper, he knew that none of the cold cases were ever going to get solved, right? And it kind of really wasn't important to the story. If I was Pete, I probably would have just said, all right, I'm not going to have the prologue of the book open up where it sounds like that this is what the book's going to be about. It's going to be about information being gleaned from these letters from serial killers written to Tony and then being passed to the police. I'm not even going to put that in as a prologue because that doesn't faithfully represent what's happening in Tony's story. I would only read this book if you're studying to become an investigator or if you are just fascinated, with true crime, and lots of us are, right? I would get the book and I would skim through it and I would read the letters. If you want an inspirational story of Tony's recovery, you could also skim through this book and just kind of skip all the letters. And then you'll have 2 books in one. So, The Serial Whisperer, Pete Earley. I'll say it's a 50-50 shot you're going to like it. So, that's my review.